extremely frustrated with this whole process, not really knowing which way to go, what to do. I just did the June test and got a 149 after quite some time of studying, so I kind of got a little disappointed with that and just don't know what I should do or to bring my score up.
I'm sorry to hear that. It's a frustrating situation. I get it. I've been there personally. I know that many students find themselves in that position as well. So in order to best support you, I'm curious if there's a particular area you find yourself struggling in, a particular section, a particular question type where I might be able to offer you some guidance.
Um, I guess where RC section I do struggle a lot with, and the games I struggle with. I pretty much struggle with all three, I guess. I guess that's apparent with the score that I got.
Right. Okay. So when you think about the section that gives you the most angst, the one that you feel is the weakest, what might that be?
Sufficient and necessary in the LR section.
Okay. So we're talking about
and must be true.
Okay. So you mean sufficient assumption, necessary assumption,
yes.
Must be true.
Yes.
Okay. Those are all fairly common question types, especially must be true and necessary assumption in particular. Do you think it relates to the perspective from which you're viewing the question?
Could be.
Okay. Do you feel like you have a handle on the difference between necessary assumption and sufficient assumption?
I do.
Okay. What would you say is the difference?
Okay. Necessary is what's needed for, or I guess what the author would agree with. And sufficient, I guess I don't.
That's okay. That's okay. That's why I'm here. So necessary assumption, as you said, it's needed. The argument requires it. The argument assumes it. So the author would agree with it. The author is logically committed to agreeing with it. If they didn't agree with it, the argument couldn't work. So you'd have an internal contradiction there. So that's why they must agree with it. And that's why if you negate the necessary assumption, the argument's destroyed.
Okay.
On the other hand, sufficient assumption, a simple proxy would be use a synonym. So sufficient, enough, necessary, required, just like in conditionality. So conditional statements, conditional reasoning, if then, same deal. Sufficient is enough, necessary is required. So sufficient assumption, very different perspective. We're looking for new information that, if true, would guarantee the argument 100%, leaving no ambiguity at all. And you tell the difference between these two question types based upon the key verb or key phrase in the question stem. Again, synonyms. Necessary assumption questions have question stems containing words that are synonymous with necessity, like depends upon, requires, assumes. Sufficient assumption, same deal. Words and phrases synonymous with sufficiency, like allows, enables, follows logically if assumed, and properly inferred if assumed.
Okay.
I've got a handful of workshops in the course that go over each question type in depth and also compare them to each other. So I'm giving you the quick summary version now. I see you taking notes, which is fine, but don't worry about getting it all down. I go into it in the course, in the workshops, and I go much deeper on how to approach each question specifically, including examples, including formulas you can apply as well.
Okay. I guess another question I would have is, I registered again for the August, and I guess the minimum amount that I wanted to go up by would be like 5 points. Do you see that as being possible?
Absolutely. I mean, we're a little over a month away from that right now. And even just applying what I shared with you here about necessary assumption versus sufficient assumption, you have at least a few questions on each of those types in the LSAT. So if you just locked up 5 points for you, that's it right there. 5 questions could be 5 points. And there's definitely at least 1 or 2 sufficient assumption questions. There's at least 3 to 4 necessary assumption questions. So that could be it.
Okay. All right. That helps.
So I would drill those. I would do at least 20 to 30 of each type. You take what I've shared with you here, that's a brief summary. Watch at least one workshop in the course on each of those types to get the deeper analysis and approaches for those, and then do 20 to 30 questions of each type to drill it and see the patterns. I'm not saying daily necessarily. I'm just saying even just 20 to 30 total of each type would do a lot to pave the way for you.
Okay.
And I wouldn't say daily, because I also want you to free up some time for must be true, which you mentioned.
Yes.
And there's also games and reading comp too.
Yeah, those must be trues are probably the most difficult for me, because a lot of the times I just don't see what must be true.
Well, there's a lot of things that must be true based on a stimulus, right? So
yeah,
you don't need to necessarily know it going in. You don't need to predict it or pre-phrase it. It could be elimination.
Okay. Okay. I guess that pretty much. And do you have any tips for improving in games?
Yeah, sure. Let's get more specific. So is there a certain game type? Or is there something about your approach you think might be off?
I think there might be something about my approach. I mean, I can get the games down, but it would take me an extremely long time. Like it takes a lot. I don't know if there's maybe a shortcut, or maybe I'm not getting enough inferences whenever I'm setting the game up in the beginning, because it's taking me a long time to complete a game. So I'm only getting to maybe probably at most 3 games.
Okay, so it could be a question of making more inferences up front, but I don't want you to feel like you have to be reliant solely upon inferences. It could also come down to being more efficient with how you use your previous hypotheticals. So any scenario that you draw can potentially serve you for other questions within that game.
Okay. Okay.
You also have the correct answer to the orientation question as another example of a valid scenario that you can use.
Okay.
I'd look for you to squeeze as much value as possible out of every hypothetical scenario that you create and that orientation question's answer, and do any local questions first, any questions that get you drawing scenarios. Do those
like
first.
The if scenarios.
Yeah, exactly. So that you have those scenarios available to you for when you get to the more general global questions. You can use those to help you eliminate answer choices and get to the right answer faster.
Okay, got it. All right, I appreciate it. I'm just going to keep on drilling and look more into the necessary and sufficient, and just so I can get my score up by just a few points minimum.
Yeah, that's all you need. You can definitely get there by August. And it's just a question of drilling, and then also using the resources, using the class recordings, attending class if you can, in order to get more exposure to go deeper on it. Because what I gave you here is just a summary. I want you to get the full version in the course as well, which you have access to with examples, with different formulas and approaches you can use.
All right, I appreciate your help so much, Steve.
Yeah, of course, Jenny. My pleasure. Any other questions for today?
No, that'll be it. Thank you.
Of course. I'm glad we connected. Reach out if anything.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye. Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.